In 2021, a deep ocean research expedition sent remotely operated cameras nearly 7 kilometers beneath the Pacific Ocean in search of a warship lost since the final months of World War II. A vessel resting in an environment where pressure alone can exceed 600 times what humans experience at the surface, and where temperatures remain just above freezing year-round. What scientists expected to find was silence, corrosion, and the slow mechanical decay that normally defines the fate of human technology once it disappears into the deep. What they did not expect was movement. As the cameras approached the hull, the monitors began revealing fish navigating the structure, small organisms covering the metal, and predators moving through the shadows of a ship that no longer functioned as a machine, but seemed to be operating as something else entirely. Something alive. The discovery forced researchers to confront a deeper scientific question that continues to grow with every expedition. When a ship sinks into the deep ocean, does it become a ruin, or does it become habitat? Warships represent some of the most sophisticated engineering achievements ever constructed for operation at sea, with reinforced hulls designed to absorb explosive force, internal compartment systems intended to contain flooding after catastrophic damage, and layers of redundancy built specifically to allow survival in conditions that would destroy almost any other machine. Every aspect of their design assumes continued existence at the ocean surface, where maintenance, repair, and human intervention remain possible. Nothing in their blueprints accounts for what happens when they fall beyond sunlight. Below roughly 1,000 meters, the ocean begins transitioning into an environment fundamentally different from anything naval engineers ever planned for. Temperature declines toward near-freezing stability, hydrostatic pressure increases relentlessly with depth, and the availability of food becomes dependent on particles slowly drifting down from surface waters, sometimes thousands of meters above. At extreme depths, the force pressing against a wreck can exceed hundreds of times what exists at sea level, producing stresses equivalent to enormous weight distributed across every exposed surface of the structure. Under such conditions, engineering logic would predict only gradual collapse and abandonment by biological systems unable to sustain complex communities. Yet across multiple oceans and across multiple decades of deep-sea exploration, researchers have repeatedly documented something entirely different. The ships do not remain empty. They become occupied. And the deeper exploration technology allows scientists to observe these environments, the more one question continues to emerge as the real mystery. Not why ships sink, but why life seems to find them so quickly when they do. For much of modern scientific history, the deep ocean was often described as a biological wasteland, a place too cold, too dark, and too energy limited to support complex ecosystems beyond scattered organisms surviving at the limits of biological possibility. Decades of deep-sea exploration have revealed a more accurate and more surprising reality. Life in the deep ocean is not absent. It is constrained. Organic material constantly falls from surface waters in the form of marine snow, providing a slow but continuous supply of energy. Microbial communities exist on nearly every available surface. Chemical gradients exist wherever water masses with different compositions interact. Energy, in limited quantities, is present almost everywhere. What is rarely present is physical structure. Much of the abyssal seafloor consists of vast sediment plains, composed of fine particles accumulated over millions of years. Environments where biological life persists, but rarely organizes into complex ecological systems because opportunities for specialization remain limited. Vertical structure, it turns out, is one of the rarest ecological resources in the deep ocean. When a warship arrives on this landscape, it does something evolution rarely provides. It introduces architecture instantly, and life responds to architecture faster than almost anything else. One of the most important insights to emerge from modern deep-sea ecology is the concept known as substrate limitation. The idea that in many deep ocean environments, biological complexity is limited less by the availability of food and more by the absence of stable surfaces capable of supporting layered ecological relationships. Hard surfaces allow organisms to elevate themselves into water flow, improving feeding efficiency and reducing burial by sediment. Elevated positions allow predators to establish territory. Protected cavities allow smaller organisms to avoid predation long enough to reproduce. A single destroyer resting on the abyssal floor can provide more vertical complexity than entire square kilometers of surrounding terrain, creating microhabitats ranging from exposed current-facing surfaces to sheltered internal compartments that function as caves. Radar towers become feeding platforms. Hull overhangs become refuge zones. Internal passageways become migration corridors. Gun mounts become anchor points. Marine ecologists describe this process as habitat heterogeneity, a principle demonstrating that increasing physical variation increases ecological opportunity. Some researchers now suggest that in certain deep ocean regions, removing large artificial structures could actually reduce local biodiversity, not because these structures are natural, but because they provide complexity that the surrounding environment lacks. Life does not respond to whether a structure is natural. It responds to whether a structure is useful. The transformation of a wreck into an ecosystem does not begin with visible animals, but with microbial communities whose influence determines everything that follows. Within days of submersion, bacterial films begin forming across exposed metal surfaces, establishing biochemical systems capable of altering the chemistry of the wreck itself. Some of these microorganisms extract energy directly from iron compounds through electrochemical reactions, while others metabolize ions released through early corrosion processes, effectively feeding on the structure while simultaneously reshaping its surface environment. Certain species produce acidic microenvironments that accelerate structural breakdown, while others generate metabolic byproducts that later organisms will depend upon as food sources. These microbes are not passive colonizers. They are ecological engineers. One of the most studied organisms in this process, Halomonas titanicae, first identified on the wreck of Titanic, feeds directly on iron compounds and produces the distinctive rust formations known as rusticles that often cover deep ocean wrecks. These formations are not simply corrosion products. They are living mineral structures created through the interaction of biology and metallurgy. Research now suggests that microbial activity may in some cases contribute more to long-term structural degradation than chemical oxidation alone, which leads to an unsettling realization. Some ships resting in the deep ocean are not merely rusting, they are being biologically consumed. Once microbial communities establish the biochemical foundation of the wreck environment, larger organisms begin arriving in patterns that scientists now recognize as ecological succession, a process similar in principle to how forests regrow after disturbance on land. Small scavenging crustaceans often appear first, feeding on organic residue and microbial growth coating exposed surfaces. Polychaete worms anchor themselves within protected crevices and extend feeding structures into the surrounding water column. Deep sea shrimp begin patrolling predictable current corridors formed by the geometry of the hull. Brittle stars position themselves in areas where suspended organic material concentrates. Each arrival slightly alters the environment, and each alteration creates new opportunities for the organisms that follow. Eventually, predators begin appearing, often in numbers higher than those found on the surrounding seafloor. Grenadier fish patrol the shadowed edges of the wreck, the way terrestrial predators patrol forest boundaries. Deep-sea eels move through internal compartments, whose structure gives them advantages unavailable in open sediment environments. Sleeper sharks have been documented investigating structural cavities, appearing to use them as opportunistic hunting locations. Researchers increasingly believe that the presence of complex structure may increase predator efficiency enough to reshape local food webs. The wreck does not simply provide habitat. It provides terrain, and terrain is one of the rarest ecological advantages in the deep ocean, which leads to a question scientists are only beginning to explore. Are some deep ocean predators learning how to use these artificial landscapes in ways evolution never specifically prepared them for? Some of the most unexpected discoveries around deep ocean wrecks have not involved new species or unusual biology, but something more subtle and perhaps more surprising behavior. Long-duration deep-sea camera deployments around several large wreck sites have revealed patterns that researchers did not originally expect to find in environments once believed to be too stable and too energy-limited to reward. Complex strategies. Certain fish have been observed positioning themselves repeatedly along the same structural edges where weak currents concentrate drifting food. Others appear to remain motionless within the shadowed geometry of towers and collapsed bulkheads, waiting in positions that maximize both concealment and access to passing prey. What makes these observations important is not simply that predators use structure, but that some individuals appear to return to the same locations repeatedly, suggesting some form of spatial memory operating even in an environment of complete darkness. This changes something fundamental about how scientists think about survival in the deep ocean. For decades, the deep sea was assumed to be an environment where life survived primarily through physiological adaptation rather than behavioral strategy. But wreck ecosystems are beginning to suggest that even here, survival may sometimes depend not just on biology, but on the ability to recognize patterns in structure and remember where opportunity exists. In a landscape without light, without landmarks, and without seasonal change, a large wreck may become something analogous to geography itself, a fixed reference point in an otherwise featureless world. And some animals may be learning to navigate it. For many years, scientists believed there must be a depth beyond which even wreck ecosystems would struggle to form, a point where pressure, cold, and energy scarcity would create a practical biological limit. That assumption began to change as exploration technology improved. The Hadal Zone, which begins around 6,000 meters and extends into the deepest ocean trenches, represents one of the most extreme environments on Earth. Pressures at these depths can exceed 600 atmospheres, enough to alter the molecular behavior of proteins and require specialized cellular adaptations simply to prevent biological structures from collapsing under compression. When the USS Samuel B. Roberts was located at nearly 7,000 meters depth, becoming the deepest confirmed shipwreck ever documented. Many researchers expected that if biological colonization existed at all, it would be minimal and slow. Instead, early survey footage revealed mobile scavengers already moving across the hull and microbial communities beginning to establish themselves on exposed surfaces. This finding suggested something that deep ocean scientists had not fully considered before. Structure may matter so much to deep ocean life that even environments approaching the physiological limits of survival may still attract colonization if architecture is present. Some researchers have even proposed that deep wrecks could function as biological stepping stones, providing rare, hard surfaces that allow species to gradually spread between otherwise isolated trench environments over evolutionary timescales. If true, human shipwrecks may be unintentionally influencing biological connectivity in the deepest regions of the planet in ways no one predicted. Scientists studying deep ocean ecosystems often compare wreck habitats to one of the most important natural events in abyssal ecology, whale falls. When a whale dies and sinks into the deep ocean, it creates a localized explosion of biological activity. Scavengers rapidly consume soft tissue. Opportunistic organisms colonize enriched sediments. Specialized bacteria break down bone lipids and create chemical gradients capable of supporting entire communities for years or even decades. Whale falls are among the most biologically important episodic events in the deep ocean, but they are temporary. Eventually, the organic material is consumed, the bones dissolve, and the ecosystem fades as the seafloor slowly returns to its previous biological baseline. steel behaves differently. In cold, low-oxygen, deep ocean environments, large wreck structures may persist for centuries. Corrosion proceeds slowly. Biological consumption is gradual. Structural collapse can take hundreds of years rather than decades. Models based on corrosion studies of Titanic suggest that recognizable structural elements in deep cold water may remain for 2 to 4 centuries before collapsing into debris fields. From a biological perspective, this is an extraordinary timescale. It means that in certain parts of the deep ocean, human-made structures may represent some of the longest-lasting ecological platforms that have ever existed in those regions, potentially outlasting whale falls, volcanic debris flows, and most naturally occurring large organic deposits. Machines lost through war or accident may be providing something evolution rarely experiences: architecture that persists long enough for ecosystems to stabilize across multiple generations. One of the most scientifically important effects of a wreck is also one of the least visible, because it involves not the structure itself, but how the structure changes the behavior of the water surrounding it. Even relatively small vertical features on the seafloor can alter local hydrodynamics in ways that significantly affect biological opportunity. Hull surfaces slow currents and create wake zones where suspended organic particles settle. Towers generate localized turbulence that mixes water layers carrying different nutrient concentrations. Cavities and corridors create low-flow regions where drifting food becomes temporarily trapped. Oceanographers studying these effects have measured localized increases in particle concentration extending well beyond the physical footprint of some wrecks, sometimes influencing feeding conditions hundreds of meters from the structure itself. This means that a wreck may function not just as a physical habitat, but as a hydrodynamic modifier, a structure capable of changing how food moves through the environment. Some scientists compare this effect to how a single tree can reshape wind flow across an otherwise flat landscape. Except in this case, the tree is constructed from steel, and the landscape is the abyssal seafloor. Life near a wreck may benefit even without touching it, because the ship changes the water itself. Not every ecological consequence of a wreck is beneficial or predictable. Ghost fishing equipment sometimes remains attached to sunken vessels or scattered across their debris fields, continuing to trap marine life long after the original sinking. Residual fuels and lubricants can alter sediment chemistry in ways that exclude some organisms while allowing others to dominate. Structural collapse events can suddenly bury established communities beneath falling debris, forcing ecosystem succession to restart from the beginning after decades of development. Yet one of the most consistent findings across deep wreck studies is not ecological damage, but ecological persistence. Deep ocean communities rarely abandon structure completely, even when contamination occurs. Instead, distribution shifts. Species reorganize themselves according to new chemical gradients. Bacterial populations capable of metabolizing hydrocarbons establish themselves in altered sediments. New ecological balances form rather than total collapse. The deep ocean does not distinguish between natural and artificial disturbances in the way humans often do. It simply responds to opportunity. If energy can be extracted, if structure can be used, if gradients can be exploited, life will attempt to adapt. And wrecks, despite their complications, represent overwhelming concentrations of opportunity in an environment where opportunity is normally scarce. Every wreck is also a clock, quietly counting down toward the moment when the structure that once defined it will finally disappear. In shallow, oxygen-rich water, steel structures can weaken quickly under the combined forces of corrosion, biological activity, and wave motion. But in the deep ocean, where temperatures remain near freezing and oxygen is limited, the same processes slow dramatically, stretching destruction across timescales, measured not in decades but in centuries. Based on long-term corrosion modeling from deep wrecks such as Titanic, researchers estimate that recognizable structural forms in cold, deep environments may persist for 200 to 400 years before collapsing into low-relief debris scattered across the seafloor. But what scientists are increasingly realizing is that the disappearance of the structure does not mean the disappearance of the ecosystem it created. Long after beams collapse and hull plates fragment, the ecological footprint of a wreck can remain embedded in the surrounding environment. Sediment chemistry altered by decades of biological activity can persist long after the last recognizable piece of the ship is gone. Microbial communities established during the structural phase may remain stable within the surrounding seabed. Fragments of metal continue to act as attachment surfaces for organisms that require hard substrate to survive. The ship may vanish visually, but biologically, the wreck can remain present as a changed patch of ocean floor, detectable not by shape, but by the invisible signatures of life that once organized itself around it. The ocean does not simply remove what falls into it. It absorbs it into ongoing processes. Some of the most intriguing questions surrounding deep wreck ecosystems are not about what lives there now, but about what these environments may become over time. Extreme depth environments are naturally isolating. Organisms living on a wreck at 5,000 meters cannot easily migrate to the next structure hundreds of kilometers away. Limited movement over long timescales is one of the classic conditions under which evolutionary divergence can occur, allowing populations to gradually develop traits specific to their local environment. Genetic studies around several deep wrecks have already revealed unexpected diversity, including lineages that differ measurably from nearby natural populations, suggesting that the presence of the wreck itself may be subtly influencing evolutionary pathways. The possibility is difficult to prove conclusively, but it is difficult to ignore. Human technology, scattered across the seafloor by history and accident, may be unintentionally creating isolated ecological laboratories where evolution can test new combinations of adaptation under conditions that did not exist before the ships arrived. Artificial islands of steel, separated by immense distances, each hosting its own slow biological experiment. Each one shaped not by design, but by opportunity, and each one continuing long after the events that placed it there have passed into history. For some scientists, the most important discoveries connected to wreck ecosystems may have nothing to do with oceans at all. Deep ocean wrecks represent controlled examples of how life colonizes new structure under extreme conditions. They provide known starting points, measurable environments, and observable ecological development across time, something rarely available in natural deep-sea systems. This makes them unexpectedly valuable to astrobiology. If life can successfully colonize cold steel in darkness under immense pressure, surviving on minimal energy and adapting to chemically complex environments, then similar survival strategies may be possible in other extreme environments beyond Earth. Scientists studying subsurface oceans on icy moons, such as Europa and Enceladus, often focus not on surface conditions, but on whether mineral surfaces, chemical gradients, and stable liquid water environments might provide the same basic ingredients that support life in Earth's deepest oceans. Wreck ecosystems demonstrate something important. Life does not require sunlight. It does not require comfort. It does not even require ideal chemistry. It requires gradients, differences in energy, surfaces where reactions can concentrate, boundaries where opportunity exists. If those conditions can exist elsewhere, then the question becomes less about where life can exist, and more about where it might already be waiting. Right now, beyond the reach of satellites, beyond shipping lanes, and beyond the awareness of almost everyone on the surface, a transformation is continuing across thousands of wreck sites scattered through the deep ocean. It is happening on the USS Johnston, resting deeper than most mountains are tall. It is happening on the Bismarck in the North Atlantic. It is happening across the Japanese fleets of Chuk Lagoon and the scuttled vessels of Scapa Flow. It is happening on submarines lost during the Cold War and on cargo ships whose names few people remember. Steel is becoming surface. Weapons are becoming shelter. Navigation towers are becoming anchor points for organisms that have never encountered light. Corridors designed for sailors have become migration routes for animals whose entire evolutionary history unfolded in darkness. Gun barrels, once designed to project force across kilometers of ocean surface, have become protective tubes where juvenile fish can hide from predators. Every surface becomes occupied. Every cavity becomes useful. Every current corridor becomes part of an ecosystem. The wreck remains, but what it is has changed completely. Not a monument to power, not a memorial to loss, but something the people who built it never imagined. A living system organized around the remains of human conflict. The ocean does not remember what these ships were built to do. It only registers what they can become. At the beginning of every sinking, a ship becomes history. But in the deep ocean, history rarely ends in the way we imagine. Pressure does not remember nations. Darkness does not remember battles. Biology does not remember which side won, or why the ship was launched, or what purpose it once served. The deep ocean recognizes only structure, chemistry, and opportunity. And wherever opportunity appears, life begins testing what is possible. Far below the surface, where pressure erases sound and darkness hides everything from view, the lost warships of every navy that ever sailed continue existing in a form no admiral ever planned and no engineer ever designed. Not as weapons, not as ruins, but as ecosystems, and perhaps that is the final transformation few people ever consider. Human technology may not end when it sinks. It may simply enter a different system, because the deep ocean does not destroy what falls into it. It reorganizes it into something new. If the hidden systems of the deep ocean fascinate you, Sunken Realms Deep explores the environments where pressure, time, and biology quietly reshape everything humanity leaves behind. Because sometimes the most important discoveries beneath the ocean are not about what we lost, but about what the ocean continues building from it.